The cold comes slowly at first, arriving in the way the air feels different against your skin, the way your breath becomes visible in front of you, small clouds of warmth leaving your body and disappearing into the surrounding darkness. For most of human history, people woke to this sensation, this awareness that the world around them was colder than the warmth inside their own bodies, and throughout the day and throughout the night, they made countless small decisions, performed countless small actions, all designed to hold on to that internal heat, to keep it from escaping too quickly into the air. Before zippers, before synthetic fabrics, before mass-produced cotton and wool garments, before buttons, and before tailored clothing as we understand it today, people still experienced winter. They still felt the cold wind move across their skin. They still needed to sleep through frozen nights and wake with enough warmth remaining in their bodies to move, to work, to continue existing in a world that was, for large portions of every year, actively trying to cool them down to a temperature incompatible with life. This is a story about warmth, but it moves slowly. The way warmth itself moves slowly through the cool morning air of a cave. The way heat gradually spreads from a central fire to the furthest corners of a shelter. There are no sudden revelations here, no moments of dramatic discovery, just the quiet, persistent human effort to remain comfortable, to stay alive, to keep the cold from winning. In the beginning, which is to say tens of thousands of years ago, and perhaps much longer than that, early humans had bodies similar to ours, bodies that generated heat through metabolism, through the burning of food into energy, through the constant, invisible work of staying alive. These bodies needed to maintain a core temperature around 98 or 99 degrees. And when the air around them dropped significantly below that, when winter arrived or when night fell in cooler regions, the body began to lose heat faster than it could produce it. And this created problems. The first solution, the oldest solution, the one that predates what we might call clothing, was fire. Fire came before tailored garments, before sewn skins, possibly even before deliberately constructed shelters in some regions. A fire is a controlled area of extreme heat, a small piece of summer that you can carry with you, feed with wood and dry grass, keep alive through careful attention. Early humans, even before they were quite like us, gathered near fires, positioned themselves in the warmth that radiated outward from the flames. During the day, a fire meant warmth and cooking and light. But at night, a fire became something else, something more essential. As temperatures dropped, as bodies cooled, families or small groups would arrange themselves in rough circles around a central fire, the flames between them and the cold darkness beyond. They would feed the fire throughout the night, taking turns when possible, or simply waking when the cold crept too close, when the fire had burned low enough that the cold had begun to win again. This pattern, this relationship with fire, shaped human sleep for millennia. People did not sleep in long, uninterrupted blocks the way we sometimes imagine primitive sleep to have been. They slept in segments, waking periodically to check the fire, to add more wood, to adjust their position toward the warmth, and then sleeping again. The night was divided into portions, each portion bounded by the need to maintain heat. But fire alone was not enough, not in truly cold environments, not during the depths of winter in Ice Age Europe or in the northern regions where cold was not a seasonal visitor but a permanent resident. Fire required fuel, required dry wood or dried dung or other combustible materials. And in some seasons, in some places, fuel became scarce. Fire also required attention, required someone to remain awake enough to prevent it from going out entirely, and this was exhausting over long periods. So early humans, probably quite early in their development, began to use the bodies of animals, specifically the outer coverings of animals, the furs and skins that had kept those animals warm during their own lives. When an animal died, either through hunting or through scavenging, people eventually realized that the skin could be removed, could be separated from the meat, and that this skin retained some quality that made it useful. At first, these skins were used fresh, draped over bodies while still heavy with fat and blood, still carrying the smell of the animal. This was not clothing as we understand it. Not yet. These were simply large pieces of animal covering, wrapped around a person's shoulders, laid across legs during sleep, used as barriers between human skin and cold air. They were not sewn, not fitted, not designed. They were borrowed warmth, stolen from the animals who no longer needed it. Over time, over many generations, people learned to prepare these skins, to make them last longer, to make them more useful. They learned to scrape away the fat and tissue that clung to the inside of the skin, using sharp stones or the edges of shells or specialized bone tools. They learned that if you stretched a skin and allowed it to dry, it became stiff but durable. They learned that if you worked it while it dried, folding it and unfolding it, softening it with your hands, it remained flexible. This process of preparing a hide took time, took effort, took knowledge, passed from one generation to the next. A woman might spend several days working on a single deerskin, first scraping it clean, then stretching it on a frame made of branches, checking it periodically, working it with her hands when it reached the right stage of dryness. Children watched this process, helped with smaller tasks, learned through observation and participation how to transform a dead animal's outer layer into something that could keep a human warm. The skins that resulted from this work were valuable. More valuable than almost anything else a person might own. A good bearskin, large and thick with fur, could mean the difference between surviving winter and not surviving winter. A family might own several skins, different sizes and thicknesses, using them in different ways depending on the season and the temperature. At night, these skins became blankets, layers of insulation between sleeping bodies and the cold ground, between sleeping bodies and the cold air above. A family might sleep together on a bed of dried grasses or leaves, covered with multiple animal skins, the weight of the furs pressing down on them, trapping the heat their bodies generated throughout the night. Children slept between adults, benefiting from the warmth on either side, protected by both fur and flesh from the cold. During the day, these same skins might be worn, draped over shoulders and tied at the waist with strips of sinew or plant fiber, rough cloaks that moved with the wearer, that could be adjusted as temperature changed. If the day was sunny and the person was working hard, moving quickly, the skin could be loosened, allowed to hang further from the body, reducing the warmth. If a cold wind arrived, the skin could be pulled tight, held close, transforming the wearer into something like the animal the skin had come from. Different animals provided different qualities of warmth. A deer hide was relatively thin, good for milder weather or for layering. A buffalo hide, thick and heavy, could withstand intense cold but was cumbersome to wear, difficult to move in. Rabbits and other small animals had soft, dense fur that provided excellent insulation relative to their size. But it took many rabbit skins to cover a human body, required more preparation time, more skill in joining multiple pieces together. In northern regions, in the far reaches where winter was not a season but a state of being, people developed relationships with animals who were themselves specialists in cold survival. They hunted seals and wore seal skins, which retained oils that helped repel water, important when dealing with snow and ice. They hunted caribou and wore caribou fur, which was hollow, each hair containing tiny air pockets that provided extraordinary insulation for very little weight. These northern peoples became experts in layering, wearing multiple skins in specific orders, each layer serving a purpose. An inner layer might be worn with the fur facing inward, against the skin, providing direct warmth and soft comfort. An outer layer might be worn with the fur facing outward, protecting against wind and precipitation, creating a barrier that the weather could not easily penetrate. Between these layers, air became trapped, and this trapped air, warmed by body heat, created additional insulation. The principle was the same principle that makes modern winter clothing effective: the creation of dead airspace, pockets of still air that resist heat transfer. Ancient humans did not understand the physics, did not have words for convection or thermal conductivity, but they understood through experience that loosely layered furs kept them warmer than a single tight layer. Children born into these northern groups learned about cold management from their earliest days. A baby might be carried inside its mother's parka, nestled against her skin, sharing her body heat directly while protected by multiple layers of fur. As the child grew, they received smaller garments, miniature versions of adult clothing, and they learned through experience how to adjust these layers, when to loosen them, when to tighten them, how to avoid sweating, which was dangerous because wet skin lost heat rapidly. The creation of actual fitted clothing, garments with sleeves and leggings, represented a significant advancement, one that required several innovations working together. First, there needed to be a method of joining skins together permanently, of creating seams that would not easily separate. This meant developing needles, sharp implements with eyes that could hold thread, usually made from thin bone or ivory, carved patiently until they were smooth enough to pierce leather without breaking. The thread itself came from animal sinew, the tough connective tissue from along an animal's spine or from major leg tendon. This sinew could be pulled into thin strands, allowed to dry partially, and then used like modern thread, pushed through holes created by the needle, pulled tight to draw two pieces of hide together. The resulting seam was durable, weather-resistant, and when done properly, nearly as strong as the hide itself. With needles and thread, a person could create garments that fit the body more closely, that moved with the wearer instead of simply hanging from them. They could create sleeves that covered arms completely, leggings that protected legs from cold wind, hoods that sheltered the head and neck. These fitted garments were more efficient than simple draped skins, providing more coverage with less material, allowing easier movement, reducing the gaps where cold air could penetrate. The process of creating such a garment took time. A woman making a coat might start by laying out the largest pieces of hide, deciding how to arrange them to create the basic structure. She would cut carefully, knowing that mistakes meant wasted material, wasted effort, wasted warmth. She would sew slowly, pushing the needle through tough leather again and again, pulling the sinew tight, checking the fit periodically by holding the partially completed garment against the person who would wear it. Such garments became prized possessions, sometimes worn for years, repaired when they tore, patched with new pieces when old pieces wore through. A person might own only one or two complete sets of warm clothing in their entire life, caring for these garments with the knowledge that they represented hundreds of hours of work, irreplaceable protection against the cold. But clothing, even well-made clothing from appropriate animal skins, was only part of the solution to staying warm. Humans also modified their environments, creating shelters that reduced exposure to wind and precipitation, that trapped heat more effectively than any garment could alone. The simplest shelters were natural features that required little modification. A cave with a south-facing entrance, protected from prevailing winds, warmed by winter sun during the day, became a valuable resource, sometimes occupied by the same group for generations. Inside such a cave, a fire could be maintained more easily than in the open, protected from wind and rain. The stone walls absorbed heat during the day and radiated it slowly at night, creating a more stable temperature than the wildly fluctuating conditions outside. Not every place had caves, though, and caves came with their own problems. They were dark beyond the reach of firelight, potentially occupied by animals who also sought shelter, sometimes damp from groundwater seeping through stone. So humans built their own shelters, structures designed specifically for human occupation, for human comfort. In forested regions, people built simple frameworks from branches, creating dome-like structures by pushing the thick ends of flexible young trees into the ground and bending the tops together, tying them with plant fibers or strips of bark. Over this framework, they layered additional branches, then covered everything with whatever insulating material was available. This might be large leaves, bundles of grass, bark panels peeled from dead trees, or animal hides if they had extras to spare. These shelters worked on the same principle as layered clothing, creating dead air space that resisted heat loss. A well-built shelter might have multiple layers, with gaps between them so that heat from inside moved slowly through successive barriers before escaping into the outside air. The entrance faced away from prevailing winds and was kept small, sometimes covered with a hide flap that could be closed during the coldest periods. Inside such a shelter, a small fire provided surprising warmth. The enclosed space meant that smoke was a problem, requiring either a vent hole at the top or simply tolerance for smoky conditions. People developed high tolerances for smoke, accepting irritated eyes and soot-covered belongings as necessary trade-offs for warmth. The alternative was cold, and cold was worse than smoke. In regions without trees, on grasslands or tundra, people built shelters from other materials. They stacked stones into circular walls, creating windbreaks that supported roofs of sod or thatch. They constructed frameworks from bones, using mammoth tusks or whale ribs as structural elements, covering these frameworks with multiple layers of hide. They dug into hillsides, creating semi-subterranean dwellings where Earth itself provided insulation, where the temperature remained relatively stable year-round. These partially underground homes were surprisingly effective. Several feet below the surface, the Earth maintained a more consistent temperature than the air above, warm enough in winter to prevent freezing, cool enough in summer to provide relief from heat. A dwelling dug into a hillside, with only one wall exposed to the outside air, lost heat much more slowly than a fully above-ground structure. The people who lived in these shelters developed daily routines around heat management. Morning began with rekindling the fire, using embers kept alive through the night, adding small, dry twigs until flames appeared, then gradually larger pieces of wood. As the interior warmed, people might shed their heaviest furs, working in lighter garments while the fire burned hot. Throughout the day, someone kept the fire going, fed it periodically, maintained it at a level appropriate for current needs. This was often work assigned to elders or to children old enough to be responsible but not yet needed for hunting or gathering. Maintaining a fire was important work, essential work, but it did not require the same physical strength as other tasks. Food itself was part of the warming strategy. Eating provided fuel for the internal fire of metabolism, and hot food, cooked in the flames or heated in containers with hot stones, transferred warmth directly into the body. A person returning from a cold day outside might warm themselves as much by eating hot stew as by sitting near the fire, the heat spreading through their stomach and into their core. Different foods provided different qualities of warmth. Fatty foods, difficult to digest, generated more heat during digestion, kept people warm for longer periods after eating. This is why groups in the far north consume so much fat, why seal blubber and whale fat and the fatty parts of caribou were prized foods, not just for their calories, but for the sustained warmth they provided during long, cold nights. The body fat that accumulated from eating these rich foods also served as insulation, an internal layer of warmth that helped maintain core temperature. People in cold climates tended to be stockier, with relatively more body mass for their height, a body type that retained heat more efficiently than the tall, thin builds better adapted to hot climates. Sleeping arrangements evolved to maximize warmth through the night. Families slept together, not for lack of space, but because multiple bodies generated more heat than one body alone. Adults positioned themselves on the outside, children and infants in the middle, with the most vulnerable members of the family receiving warmth from multiple directions. Sometimes dogs, already domesticated in many cultures, slept with their human families, adding their body heat to the collective warmth. This was the origin of the expression about a three-dog night, a night so cold that you needed 3 dogs sleeping with you to stay warm enough. The dogs benefited too, receiving shelter and shared warmth in exchange for their companionship and their contributions to hunting. The sleeping area was usually positioned near the fire, but not too close enough to receive radiant heat, but far enough that sparks would not land on sleeping bodies or on the furs that covered them. The ground beneath the sleeping area was carefully prepared, cleared of rocks and sticks, sometimes dug slightly into a depression to reduce exposure to cold air that settled near floor level. On top of the cleared ground, people laid thick layers of dried grass, leaves, pine needles, or any other soft insulating material available. This mattress layer was important, perhaps more important than any covering, because it prevented the cold ground from drawing heat directly from sleeping bodies. Ground contact was a major source of heat loss, and addressing it significantly improved sleep quality and survival during extreme cold. Over this mattress of plant material, people might lay a bottom layer of furs, creating a soft, sleeping surface that was itself warm. Then bodies arranged themselves, and finally more furs were pulled over everyone, creating a warm pocket of air that grew warmer through the night from accumulated body heat. In the morning, emerging from this warm cocoon into cold air was difficult, requiring motivation, requiring the knowledge that the fire needed tending, that food needed gathering, that life required moving forward despite discomfort. People learned to dress quickly, keeping clothing near the sleeping area so that cold exposure was minimized, pulling on garments that were still slightly warm from having been used as additional pillows or covers during the night. The development of permanent or semi-permanent dwellings changed how people related to cold. Instead of being constantly mobile, following animal herds or seasonal plant resources, groups could establish bases, could invest more effort in creating comfortable shelters because they would use these shelters repeatedly over months or years. In these more permanent homes, people accumulated possessions that helped with warmth management. They stockpiled firewood during warmer months, creating reserves that would last through winter. They collected and prepared extra furs and skins, building supplies for repairs and replacements. They stored food, dried and smoked and preserved, so that they could remain inside during the worst weather, venturing out only when necessary. Some groups developed heated sleeping platforms, raised areas made of stone or packed earth, under which fires could be built. The fire heated the sleeping platform from below, and while the fire itself was allowed to die down at night, the mass of the platform retained heat for hours, radiating warmth upward into sleeping bodies. This principle of thermal mass that held and slowly released heat appeared independently in many different cultures, suggesting that humans everywhere eventually discovered this effective method of staying warm through cold nights. Clothing evolved differently in different regions, responding to local conditions and available materials. In areas where plant fibers were abundant, people learned to spin and weave, creating textiles from plant material. These early woven garments were not as warm as fur in extreme cold, but they were lighter, easier to clean, and more breathable during moderate temperatures or during physical exertion. The process of turning plant fibers into thread and thread into cloth was time-consuming, methodical work. Women, primarily, though not exclusively, spent countless hours processing flax or hemp or cotton, breaking down the plant material, removing the strong fibers, cleaning and combing these fibers, then spinning them into continuous threads by twisting them together while pulling them thin. Spinning was work that could be done while sitting, while talking, while watching children, and so it fit into the rhythms of daily life without requiring dedicated, isolated effort. A woman might spin for a few minutes here and there throughout the day, gradually accumulating enough thread for weaving. The motion became automatic, hands working without conscious thought, allowing the mind to wander or to focus on conversation, on stories, on the transmission of knowledge from old to young. The methods change, but the need remains constant, and the solutions, at their core, remain the same as they were tens of thousands of years ago, when the first human deliberately placed an animal skin between their body and the frozen ground, felt the difference it made, and decided to keep doing it, night after night, until the cold season passed and warmth returned to the world once more. And perhaps there is something quietly profound in this continuity, in the fact that we share this experience across such vast distances of time. When you pull a blanket closer on a cold night, when you move nearer to a heat source, when you layer clothing before stepping into winter air, you are performing actions that connect you to countless generations, to people who lived before nations existed, before written language, before almost everything we consider modern life. They would recognize what you are doing. They would understand the comfort you feel. They knew the same relief of warmth after cold, the same gratitude for shelter during storms, the same simple pleasure of being protected from the wind. These ancient people were not so different from us, not in the ways that matter most. They worried about their families, worked to keep loved ones safe and comfortable, passed knowledge to their children, found satisfaction in solving problems well. They experienced cold mornings and warm fires, the heaviness of good sleep, and the reluctance to leave comfortable positions. The details of their lives were different. The materials they worked with were simpler. But the fundamental human experience, the core of what it meant to be alive and aware and trying to make the best of circumstances, this remains unchanged across all the millennia that separate us from them. If you have found some comfort in this story, if these quiet hours have brought you a measure of peace or helped you understand something about the long human journey through cold and warmth, consider subscribing to this channel, where we explore more of these gentle connections to our past, more of these slow-moving stories that remind us who we have always been. There will be more nights, more stories, more quiet explorations of the ordinary, extraordinary lives of people who came before us. People who solved the same problems we still face, who felt what we still feel, who were, in the end, simply doing their best to stay warm, to stay alive, to care for those around them, just as we do now, just as humans have always done, from the very beginning until this present moment, and onward into whatever cold nights still wait ahead.